Hi, this is Corey Johnston, and in today's lesson, we're going to be discussing ways in which you can identify, develop, and cultivate your spiritual giftedness. Now, spiritual gifts are essential for the church. They are the propeller without which the assembly would cease to exist. It could no longer function or operate. And it is incumbent upon the individuals to exercise their gifts with the collective in mind, because with every gift there entails a certain potential for abuse, and any gift involves an exchange between a giver and a recipient, and we really owe it to the one who gives it to us to make the best use of it in the way that he deems fit, because all of our gifts derive from Elohim. Now, the first verse we're going to touch upon is Ecclesiastes 3:13, and Solomon writes, "And also that every man should eat and drink, and enjoy the good of all his labor. It is a gift of Elohim." So he's essentially saying that every man is entitled to enjoy the fruits of their labor, and the delusion which accumulating works is that we can develop self-sufficiency and forget that even the items that we strive for, everything in the final analysis derives from heaven, and it is a gift and not of our own making. So life itself is God's gift to us. How we live that life is our gift to him. Ergo, it is incumbent that we align ourselves with his will and exercise our giftedness accordingly. And the next verse is going to come from the same book, the 19th verse of the 5th chapter, which reads, "Further, when Elohim has given any man riches and wealth, and permitted him to enjoy them, and to receive his portion, and rejoice in his labor, this is a gift of Elohim." So the existence of wealth and earthly treasures is not necessarily sinful. It is the love of them which is inherently sinful, but they are gifts, and we are to cultivate them with that in mind. And now the gifts we just spoke of are broader gifts than spiritual gifts. Gifts, more broadly speaking, are something external, so something we can grasp or hold or touch. But the spiritual gifts are internal, and they are manifest through a power above us. And the New Testament expounds upon the spiritual giftedness more extensively than the Old. And the first verse we're going to touch upon is in James 1:17, which reads, "Every good gift and every perfect gift is from above, coming down from the Father of lights, with whom there is no change, nor shadow of turning." So therein we read that every gift is derived and has its source and origin and fulfillment in the Father in heaven, and that reminds us that our gifts are not strictly speaking for our own. They are not for our individual enjoyment, but for corporate employment. And the next passage we're going to read is 1 Corinthians 7, verse 7, which reads, "For I prefer that all men were even as myself, but each one has his own gift from Elohim, one in this way, and another in that." So this is Paul addressing the Corinthian assembly, and he's acknowledging that gifts are universal, so everybody has one, and it is implicitly incumbent upon us to identify it and develop it. And how do we find out what our gift is? Because the average believer in the spectator phase of their walking into church is not going to know what their gift is, or even that they have it. So it's incumbent upon more mature believers to help them identify it, and we are to pray for gifts. And we can always experiment with gifts. So the only way to find out if you are in fact gifted with the gift of preaching is to preach. The next verse we're going to read is 1 Peter 4:10, which reads, "As each one has received a gift, serve one another as good trustees of the manifold grace of Elohim." So once more, we reiterate that our gifts are not for ourselves, but our gifts are given to us to give to others. So the internal spiritual giftedness that we have, and we're going to give more specific examples of the various gifts as this discourse develops, but for now it suffices to say that they are not our own. They are manifested and utilized in the giving of the gift. They're not to be hoarded, and any assembly would implode if any individual hoarded their gifts for any special or selfish exercise thereof. The next verse we're going to read is 1 Corinthians 12:1, which reads, "And concerning spiritual gifts, brothers, I do not want you to be ignorant. So the tragedy is that even though every person has a spiritual gift, so many of us don't know that we have it. And there is a golden mean between the extremes of exalting oneself excessively and debasing oneself, thinking we cannot contribute to a church. Now, church demands more than spectators from the audience, and every believer has a gift, and the church collectively realizes its potential and fulfills its function only when each member contributes something and gives in the proportion to their labors." And the next verse we're going to read is 1 Timothy 4:14, which reads, this is Paul writing to his pastoral protege, Timothy, and he writes, "Do not neglect the gift that is in you, which was given to you by prophecy, with the laying on of the hands of the elderhood." So having the gift and knowing we have the gift comes a responsibility to wield it consistently, and just as muscles will atrophy or wither in the absence of activity, so too do spiritual gifts and appetites and capacities similarly wither in proportion to their inactivity. So our gifts are to be developed and cultivated through the exercise thereof. It's not enough to know that we have the gift. We have to use it and realize it in the using. It's not in the knowing, it's in the doing that we realize our gifts. Now, we may acknowledge our gifts, come to an intellectual understanding that we do have the gift, but what good is it if we sit on it? It's not meant to be sit on, but meant to be manifest. And we owe the one who gave us the gift nothing less than to use it in the employment of our fellow brethren. And the next verse we're going to read is Romans 11:29, which reads, "For the gifts and the calling of Elohim are not to be repented of." So to repent, now we typically think of that in a positive direction from a negative stance, that being sin. We repent of sin, but more broadly speaking, repent means to reverse. It's rooted in a Latin military term, to do an about face. So once we know that we have the gift and the gift has been given to us, we should not repent of it, but should exercise it accordingly and reverently with that in mind. And now we're going to deal with some of the more specific manifestations of the gift in the 12th chapter, 6th through 8th verse of the same book, which reads, "Now having different gifts, according to the grace which was given to us, if prophecy, according to the proportion of faith, if serving, in the serving, or he who is teaching, in the teaching, or he who encourages, in the encouragement, or he who is in sharing, in sincerity, he who is in leading, in diligence, and he who shows compassion, joyously." So there's a whole laundry list of gifts, and we're going to dissect them one by one, but the opening verse reads that there are diversities of gifts, and they spring from the same source, which is divine grace. And prophecy is not strictly speaking limited to prediction, but can also translate as preaching. So anyone who proclaims a word in the name of Elohim is strictly speaking a prophet. Serving, now the gifts of helps. Now, we may look to an exemplary model in Mother Teresa. And one time she was confronted by a news reporter who was a skeptic by nature, as many journalists are, and frankly informed her that for all her fervent activity, that she was not making a statistical dent in the poverty of India where she ministered. And her answer is worthy of instructive to contemplate. She said that she was not motivated by statistics but love. So in all these gifts, use love. And Paul comments in the first three verses of the 13th chapter of 1 Corinthians that any gift is effectively meaningless or useless in the absence of love. But to return to Mother Teresa, now in Billy Graham, we witness a similar exemplary model for evangelism. But the fact is that most of us aren't called to yield those numbers. So God rewards the effort, not the outcome. We are to exercise our gifts accordingly, and teaching is in the teaching. Now, I myself, my main spiritual giftedness is in teaching, and I enjoy it very much, but for the first several years of my born-again experience, I really didn't know that I had enough knowledge to even share. So I was just progressively accumulating more information, and then one day, inexorably, I realized I had the gift of teaching and haven't looked back since. He who encourages, encouragement is essential because we are to bear each other's burdens and to give words of hope when others are prone to despair. Sharing is generosity is the glue which not only holds the assembly together, but the assemblies together. We exist in a charitable cooperation. He who is leading in diligence, now he who assumes the leadership role at a church, in most cases, is gifted with the gift of preaching, but their true the mark of a true minister is the delegation of because any minister who tries to run the whole church himself is going to be defeated by the effort. So he has to know each individual congregants intimately and know their gift and put them in the right place in order to perform the function to make the church run as it should. And compassion, joy, or mercy, that means joyously. So that we are to be merciful is self-evident and demands neither elaboration or explanation, but how we are to show mercy is with joy. And the next passage we're going to read is delving on the greater specificity of these gifts is 1 Corinthians 12, 4 through 11. And it reads, wrong book of Corinthians. And there are many different kinds of gifts, but the same Spirit. There are different kinds of services, but the same Master. And there are different kinds of workings, but it is the same Elohim who is working all in all. And to each one is given the manifestation of the Spirit for profiting. For one is given a word of wisdom through the Spirit, and to another a word of knowledge according to the same Spirit, and to another faith by the same Spirit, and to another gifts of healing by the same Spirit, and to another operations of powers, and to another prophecy, and to another discerning of spirits, and to another kinds of tongues, and to another interpretation of tongues. But one and the same Spirit works all these, distributing to each one individually as he intends. So from start to finish, we really learn that the source through whom spiritual giftedness derives is the Ruach Kadesh, or the Spirit, who is the enabling force which allows us to exercise our gifts, and they are to be administered under his jurisdiction. And so even though there's the diversity of gifts, they are derived from a singular source, and we're going to dissect some of these as we did in the passage of Romans. Wisdom is a gift that's the intelligent use of intelligence. Without it, no organization can function in the absence of wise leadership. And knowledge is at the foundation of wisdom. Wisdom is a more exalted realm of knowledge. And faith is a gift, and we are to exercise it accordingly. Now, in some sense, every believer, every authentic believer has faith, but he's speaking of extraordinary faith, the faith that can move mountains. And healing is a gift that was, there's been various saints throughout the age who have performed miracles of healing. So in our postmodern scientific society, we can ridicule or dismiss the possibility of spiritual healing, but they are very much, in fact, true. And operations of powers, that just means the ability to perform an action, so any ministry of any variety or component. And prophecy, we already covered that. Discerning of spirits is, discernment is the radar which distinguishes what is good and what is bad. So the presence of false teachers and heretics are present in every age, in nearly every assembly, and it is incumbent upon the discerning one to expose, examine, and expel them. And tongues they were more functionally essential in the apostolic era. From its inception, the church was a pan-national movement of people speaking variety of tongues, and one of the ways they heard the same message was they would be visited by the Spirit, and the person would speak in that tongue without any prior education of that knowledge, and it would be accurately confirmed. So he identifies an interpretation of tongue as a supplementary counterpart. Now, the gift of tongues virtually went extinct until recently revived by the Pentecostal movement. But the fact is that even though the speaking of tongues is no longer functionally essential in the age of the Rosetta Stone, it is still a valid manifestation of the Ruach Kodesh. And I've never personally witnessed the exercise of tongues, but I was formally educated at the Northwest University. It's a Pentecostal denomination affiliated with the Assemblies of God, and I've conversed with professors and students who have witnessed this gift in action, and I know them to be trustworthy and reliable men, so I will not dismiss the tongues. And but these are all distributed according to the purpose of the author of the gifts, the Spirit. And the next passage we're going to read is in the same chapter, verses 28 through 31, which reads, "And Elohim has appointed these in the assembly, firstly apostles, second prophets, thirdly teachers, after that miracles, then gifts of healings, helps, ministrations, kinds of tongues. Are all apostles? Are all prophets? Are all teachers? Are all workers of miracle? Do all have gifts of healing? Do all speak with tongues? Do all interpret? But earnestly seek the better gifts, and yet I will show you a more excellent way." So there is a hierarchy of gifts that he alludes to, and there are superior gifts, and we are explicitly admonished to seek after these superior gifts. And this, once more, I'll reiterate that discovering and cultivating and developing one's gift does involve an experimental ethos. We have to step into unfamiliar terrain in order to test our gifts. But the fact is that no one believer has the monopoly of gifts, and the Creator does not distribute his gifts evenly. So even there are degrees in preaching and all of that, but we are all to give in proportion to our abilities. And he asked the rhetorical question that not every single believer has every single gift, but together we do have the gifts in their entirety, in their wholeness, and through them we will realize the fullness of our purpose. And the next passage we're going to read is 1 Corinthians 14, 1 and 12. And so he says, "Pursue love and earnestly seek the spiritual gifts, but rather that you prophesy." So love is identified in the preceding chapter. You can type in Corey Johnston, 1 Corinthians 13, the meaning of love for more on that. It is gives meaning to all other gifts. Any gift exercised not in love is self-defeating and vanity. But he's asserting the superiority of prophecy over tongues. Tongues he diminishes to the lowest. They were at the tail end of his hierarchy just described. But we should not dismiss any giftedness or gifted people from making their contribution. And the next verse we're going to read is verse 12. "So also you, since you are ardent for spiritual gifts, seek to excel in the edifying of the assembly." Edifying is an architectural term for upholding and uplifting a building, and that is the analogous equivalent of, because the assembly is not a building, it is the people who gather in a building, but wherever we go, the assembly travels with us. And the Corinthian assembly to whom this epistle was addressed had no shortage of gifts, but they were imploding from the abusive and undisciplined exercise of those gifts. So much of these letters are written with that in mind. And the final verse we're going to close on is 2 Corinthians 9:15. Which reads, "Thanks also to Elohim for his unspeakable gifts." So we think it's most appropriate to conclude this discourse by giving thanks to Elohim, who gives us the gifts we need in order to serve him in a manner that is worthy of him. And we should always be mindful and grateful and thankful that he elects to give us our gifts. And as I said in the introduction, life itself is his gift to us. How we live that life is our gift to him. And that's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much. Tune in next time. Bye-bye.